The distress call came in at 3:47 a.m. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant. We have engine failure in 12-foot seas, requesting immediate assistance." The storm had been building for hours, but Captain Martinez knew only one civilian in the area crazy enough to launch in these conditions. He was about to learn that crazy wasn't the right word. Neither was civilian. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we dive into this incredible tale of hidden leadership, maritime mastery, and the moment when a quiet Marina owner revealed who he really was, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Some legends hide behind the most ordinary facades. Bar Harbor, Maine, had seen its share of characters over the decades, but Tom Sullivan wasn't one of them. At least, that's what everyone thought. He'd owned Sullivan's Marina for 12 years, ever since moving to Maine from somewhere down south, a detail he never elaborated on, and locals had stopped asking about. The Marina was small but well-maintained, 24 slips, a modest boat rental operation, and a shop that sold everything from fishing tackle to emergency flares. Tom lived in the apartment above the office, worked 7 days a week, and kept to himself. At 58, Tom was tall and lean, with silver hair that was always perfectly trimmed and pale blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. He spoke with a slight southern accent that became more pronounced when he was tired or concentrating. Most customers found him polite but reserved, the kind of man who answered questions directly but never volunteered extra information. The Coast Guard station Bar Harbor was directly across the harbor, close enough that Tom could watch the cutters come and go from his office window. Over the years, he'd developed a cordial relationship with the Coast Guard personnel. They'd rent boats for training exercises, buy supplies when their commissary was short, and occasionally stop by for coffee and Tom's surprisingly accurate weather predictions. October in Maine could be unpredictable, but experienced mariners knew when to pay attention to the signs. Tom had been watching the weather for 3 days, tracking a low-pressure system that the National Weather Service was calling potentially severe. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, the station's operations officer, stopped by the Marina Tuesday afternoon to secure additional small craft warnings. "What's your read on this one, Tom?" she asked, pointing at the storm clouds building on the horizon. Tom studied the sky with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read weather patterns like a book. "She's going to be bad. 40-knot winds, 12 to 15-foot seas. I'd keep everything in port until Thursday morning." Sarah nodded. Tom's weather predictions were legendary in the area, more accurate than most meteorologists, and always conservative when it came to safety. She'd learned to trust his judgment over the years. "We've got the Vigilant doing a routine patrol tonight. Should we recall her?" Tom looked at the harbor, then back at the darkening sky. "If it were my call, I'd bring her home, but that's not my decision to make anymore." Sarah caught something in his tone, a weariness that suggested he'd made such decisions before. But before she could ask what he meant, Tom had already turned back to his weather charts. By 10 p.m., the storm was living up to Tom's predictions. Wind howled through the Marina's rigging, and waves were already hitting 8 feet in the outer harbor. Tom sat in his office, monitoring multiple radio frequencies, a habit that most people assumed was just part of running a marina. The Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant, a 110-foot patrol boat, was 20 miles offshore, conducting a routine fisheries patrol. Captain Ricardo Martinez was an experienced officer, but at 34, he'd never seen a storm quite like this one developing. Tom listened as the Coast Guard communications became increasingly tense. The Vigilant was taking a beating, but she was built for it. What concerned Tom was the engine temperature readings he was hearing in the background chatter. They suggested cooling system problems that could escalate quickly in rough seas. At 2:30 a.m., Tom's concerns proved justified. "Station Bar Harbor, this is Vigilant. We're experiencing engine cooling issues. Request permission to return to port immediately." But by then, it was too late for an easy return. At 3:47 a.m., every radio in Bar Harbor crackled with the call that every mariner dreaded. Mayday, mayday, this is Coast Guard Cutter Vigilant. We have complete engine failure in 12-foot seas, taking on water through forward compartments, 23 souls on board, requesting immediate assistance. Tom was already moving before the transmission ended. He'd been fully dressed for hours, anticipating this exact scenario. He activated his marine radio and monitored the emergency frequencies while pulling on his foul-weather gear. Station Bar Harbor's duty officer, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, was coordinating the response, but the options were limited. The station's smaller boats couldn't handle 12-foot seas, and the nearest large cutter was 6 hours away. In these conditions, the Vigilant had maybe 2 hours before the situation became critical. Station Bar Harbor, this is Tom Sullivan at Sullivan's Marina. I'm monitoring your emergency traffic. I can be underway in 10 minutes with a vessel capable of handling these conditions. There was a pause on the radio. Jake Morrison knew Tom had boats, but nothing that should be capable of handling this kind of weather. Mr. Sullivan, we appreciate the offer, but civilian vessels should remain in port during this storm. Lieutenant Morrison, Tom's voice was calm, but carried an authority that made Jake pay attention. I have a vessel and the experience to reach Vigilant. Unless you have other assets available, I'm your best option. Jake Morrison made the decision that probably saved 23 lives. Mr. Sullivan, you are authorized to render assistance. Please exercise extreme caution. Tom was already at the dock, standing next to a boat that Jake had never seen before. It was a 65-foot sport fisherman, but not like any recreational vessel in the area. This boat was built for serious work, reinforced hull, professional electronics suite, and engines that looked like they belonged on a military vessel. Tom fired up the twin diesels and cast off into conditions that would have terrified most civilian mariners. But as Jake watched through binoculars, he realized that Tom wasn't just surviving the storm, he was mastering it. The boat cut through the waves with precision that spoke of decades of experience. Tom's navigation was flawless, his timing perfect as he rode the swells and avoided the worst of the breaking seas. This wasn't luck or desperation. This was professional seamanship at its highest level. Tom reached the Vigilant in 43 minutes, a transit that should have taken over an hour in those conditions. Captain Martinez watched in amazement as the civilian boat approached with textbook precision, taking station alongside the disabled cutter despite 12-foot seas and 40-knot winds. Vigilant, this is Sullivan's Marina Vessel Ranger. I'm alongside your port quarter. Do you need personnel evacuation or engineering assistance? Martinez keyed his radio. Sullivan's Marina, we have the water under control, but we need a tow back to port. Can you handle a 110-foot cutter in these conditions? Tom's response was calm and professional. Affirmative, Vigilant. I'll put a line across. My vessel can handle the tow. What happened next defied everything Captain Martinez thought he knew about civilian boat handling. Tom maneuvered his boat with precision that would have impressed Navy coxswains, placed the tow line exactly where it needed to be, and began the delicate process of bringing the disabled cutter home. For the next 2 hours, Tom demonstrated boat handling skills that Captain Martinez had only seen in advanced military training. He adjusted speed and course to minimize stress on both vessels, navigated by compass and GPS while avoiding hazards that weren't on any chart, and maintained perfect communication discipline throughout the operation. By 7 a.m., both vessels were safely moored at Station Bar Harbor. The storm was finally beginning to subside, and the Vigilant's crew was safe thanks to Tom's intervention. But Captain Martinez had questions that needed answers. He found Tom in the Marina office, calmly filling out paperwork and monitoring weather reports, as if he'd just returned from a routine fishing trip. Mr. Sullivan, Martinez began, I need to thank you for what you did out there. But I also need to ask, where did you learn to handle a boat like that? Tom looked up from his paperwork, and Martinez saw something in those pale blue eyes that he recognized, the look of someone who'd been tested by the sea and emerged stronger. Previous job, Tom said simply. What kind of previous job teaches civilian boat handling like that? Tom was quiet for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside was a photograph, a much younger Tom Sullivan in naval dress whites, standing beside a massive warship. The insignia on his uniform indicated flag rank, not just an officer, but an admiral. "I used to command ships a little bigger than the Ranger," Tom said quietly. Captain Martinez stared at the photograph, then at the man sitting across from him. "Admiral?" "Rear Admiral, retired. Thomas J. Sullivan, former commander of the 2nd Fleet's destroyer squadron." Martinez felt the world shift beneath him. He'd just been rescued by a man who had once commanded an entire fleet of warships. "Sir, I had no idea." "That was the point," Tom said. "I came here to retire, not to be treated differently because of what I used to do." Martinez looked around the simple Marina office with new eyes. The nautical charts weren't just decorations. They were working documents marked with the kind of detailed navigation notes that only came from decades of professional seamanship. The radio equipment was more sophisticated than what most recreational boaters would need. Even the coffee was Navy strong. "How long were you in command?" Martinez asked. 32 years active duty. Last assignment was Atlantic Fleet operations before I took my pension." Martinez did quick math. If Tom had been commanding Atlantic Fleet operations, he'd overseen naval activities from the Caribbean to the Arctic. No wonder he'd handled the rescue operation like it was routine. Word spread quickly through Station Bar Harbor. Within hours, every Coast Guard officer on the base knew that the quiet Marina owner who'd been providing weather forecasts and spare parts was actually a retired admiral who'd commanded some of the Navy's most important operations. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was the first to visit Tom's office after the story broke. She found him exactly where she'd expected, behind his desk, monitoring weather reports and maintaining his equipment as if nothing had changed. "Admiral Sullivan," she began, then stopped when Tom held up his hand. "Tom, just Tom. The rank stays with the uniform." "Sir, Tom, why didn't you ever mention your background?" Tom leaned back in his chair and looked out at the harbor where the Vigilant was undergoing repairs. "Sarah, I spent 3 decades giving orders, making decisions that affected thousands of people, and living under the weight of command. When I retired, I wanted something simple, peaceful, a place where I could still work on the water without the responsibility of other people's lives." "But you took responsibility for 23 lives last night." Tom smiled slightly. "Old habits die hard. When people are in trouble on the water, you help. That's not about rank or service. That's about being human." Over the following days, details of Tom's naval career began to emerge. Not through his own sharing, Tom remained as private as ever, but through the natural curiosity of Coast Guard personnel who now understood they'd been interacting with naval history. Lieutenant Morrison did some discreet research and discovered that Rear Admiral Thomas J. Sullivan had been one of the Navy's rising stars. He'd commanded destroyers in the Persian Gulf, led anti-piracy operations off Somalia, and served as a key strategic planner during several classified operations. His final assignment had been as Deputy Commander of Fleet Forces Command, essentially the Navy's second highest operational position on the East Coast. He'd retired at the relatively young age of 54, apparently walking away from a career that could have led to the Pentagon's highest offices. "Why Maine?" Sarah asked during one of their weather discussions. "You could have done anything, gone anywhere." "I grew up sailing on Penobscot Bay," Tom replied. "My grandfather had a lobster boat. Some of my best memories are from these waters. When it came time to choose what came next, this felt like coming home." The rescue of the Vigilant became legendary within Coast Guard circles, not just because of the seamanship involved, but because of who had performed it. Tom found himself receiving visitors from Coast Guard headquarters, Navy officials, and maritime organizations who wanted to recognize his heroism. He declined every award, turned down every interview, and politely refused invitations to speak at maritime conferences. Tom Sullivan, the Marina owner, wanted the same thing as Admiral Sullivan, to be left alone to do his work. But the Coast Guard personnel at Station Bar Harbor couldn't ignore what they'd learned. Their relationship with Tom changed, not because they treated him differently, but because they understood him better. When Tom provided weather forecasts, they listened with the respect due someone who'd been reading ocean conditions for 4 decades. When he offered navigation advice, they knew it came from experience commanding ships in every ocean on Earth. When he suggested equipment modifications or procedural changes, they understood they were receiving counsel from one of the Navy's former strategic leaders. Tom found that retirement couldn't completely separate him from his instinct to develop younger officers. Gradually, he began taking a more active role in mentoring the Coast Guard personnel who frequented his marina. Lieutenant Morrison, eager to learn from Tom's experience, started stopping by regularly for informal discussions about navigation, leadership, and seamanship. Tom would share lessons learned from decades of command, but always in the context of civilian operations rather than military strategy. Leadership isn't about the bars on your collar, Tom told him during one such conversation. It's about making decisions under pressure and taking responsibility for the consequences. Whether you're commanding a destroyer or running a marina, the principles are the same. Sarah Chen found herself discussing strategic planning with Tom, though neither of them called it that. They would review Coast Guard operational procedures, discuss resource allocation, and analyze response times, conversations that helped Sarah develop the kind of strategic thinking that had made Tom successful in the Navy. Tom's expertise became invaluable during the rest of the storm season. His weather predictions helped Station Bar Harbor optimize their vessel scheduling and resource allocation. His navigation advice prevented several potential groundings by inexperienced boaters. His equipment recommendations improved the station's operational efficiency. Most importantly, his presence provided a sense of confidence that came from knowing that one of the Navy's former strategic commanders was available for consultation if needed. Tom never offered unsolicited advice, but when asked, his counsel was invariably valuable. During one particularly severe nor'easter, Tom coordinated an informal network of civilian boats to assist with search and rescue operations. His ability to organize complex operations while maintaining safety standards impressed everyone involved, including visiting Coast Guard officials from sector headquarters. "He runs that marina like a military operation," one inspector noted, "but somehow makes it feel completely natural." A year after the Vigilant rescue, Station Bar Harbor held a change of command ceremony. Captain Martinez was being promoted and transferred to a sector command position. During the ceremony, he made a point of recognizing Tom's contributions to maritime safety in the area. "Rear Admiral Sullivan has demonstrated that true leadership doesn't end with retirement," Martinez said. "His expertise, professionalism, and commitment to safety have made our operations more effective and our waters safer for everyone." Tom stood in the back of the crowd, uncomfortable with the public recognition, but proud of the work being done by the younger officers he'd helped mentor. After the ceremony, the new commanding officer, Captain Jennifer Walsh, approached Tom privately. "Admiral, I hope you'll continue working with us. Your experience is invaluable to our mission." "Tom," he corrected automatically, "and as long as you need weather forecasts and spare parts, I'll be here." Captain Walsh smiled. "I think we need more than weather forecasts and spare parts. We need wisdom, experience, and the kind of leadership that can only come from decades of service. Will you consider a formal consultant position?" Tom looked out at the harbor where Coast Guard vessels were preparing for another day of operations, then back at the young captain who was about to take responsibility for maritime safety across hundreds of square miles of dangerous waters. "Let me think about it," he said. Tom never accepted an official consultant position, but his informal role as mentor and advisor expanded. He began participating in training exercises, not as an instructor, but as an observer whose insights helped improve operational effectiveness. Young Coast Guard officers would seek him out for career advice, navigation training, and leadership development. Tom found that he could share 4 decades of experience without the administrative burdens that had made his final years in the Navy less satisfying. His marina became an unofficial extension of Station Bar Harbor, a place where Coast Guard personnel could access not just supplies and services, but wisdom from one of the Navy's former strategic leaders. Tom remained as private about his past as ever, but he no longer felt the need to hide his expertise. When situations demanded his knowledge, he provided it without fanfare or self-promotion. The distress call that had awakened Bar Harbor at 3:47 a.m. revealed more than just Tom Sullivan's boat handling skills. It revealed the truth that retirement doesn't end service, it just changes the nature of how we serve. Tom had tried to leave his naval career behind when he moved to Maine. He wanted simplicity, anonymity, and peace. But when 23 Coast Guard personnel needed help in 12-foot seas, Admiral Thomas J. Sullivan couldn't remain hidden behind Tom, the Marina owner. Some leaders retire to golf courses and corporate boards. Others find ways to continue serving, quietly passing their knowledge to the next generation while remaining available when their expertise is truly needed. Tom Sullivan found his own way to continue serving, not through formal command structures or official positions, but through daily acts of mentorship, expertise, and readiness to help when help was needed most. The Marina still operates 7 days a week. Tom still provides weather forecasts and spare parts. But now everyone knows that when the storms get bad enough and the situation's desperate enough, Bar Harbor has access to one of the Navy's former strategic commanders. He just prefers to be called Tom. Have you ever discovered that someone in your community was hiding an extraordinary past? A quiet professional whose humble exterior concealed decades of leadership and expertise? Share their story in the comments. Tell us about the hidden admirals, generals, and heroes who continue to serve their communities long after their official service ended. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that true leadership never retires. It just finds new ways to make a difference. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about the quiet professionals among us, the ones who shaped history and continue to shape their communities through wisdom, experience, and readiness to serve when service is needed most.